When the judge signed the divorce papers, my ex-husband smiled like a man who had just won a war. He shook his lawyer's hand, adjusted his Italian tie, the one I gave him for our last wedding anniversary, and walked out of the courtroom without even looking at me. He thought he had taken everything, the house, the car, the savings account I spent 15 years building. He even managed to twist the custody agreement so I'd only see my daughter on weekends. And the worst part? I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Because I was already planning what he could never imagine. Revenge. Not the messy, screaming kind. No. Mine would be quiet, sophisticated. The kind that doesn't just take something from you. It makes you question everything you thought you had. I remember sitting in my car after the hearing, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back at me looked nothing like the one who used to smile in our wedding photos. But I promised her, the woman in the mirror, that I wouldn't be a victim. And this is the story of how I kept that promise. Because what he didn't know was that the moment he walked away from me, he walked straight into the trap I had already started building. And now, looking back, I realize, sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from a woman who was underestimated one too many times. If you were in my place, would you fight back or walk away? Leave your comment before we go any further. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story is just getting started. I used to believe that love could survive anything, distance, time, even betrayal. But I was wrong. Love doesn't survive betrayal. It only survives the illusion of trust. Ethan and I had been married for 15 years. We met at a charity gala in Boston, the kind of event where people drink champagne they can't pronounce and pretend to care about the cause. He was charming, confident, and ambitious. He said I had the most intentional eyes he'd ever seen. Whatever that meant, it worked. I was a financial consultant with my own modest practice. Ethan was just starting out in real estate. He had no savings, but big dreams. And I believed in him. That was my first mistake. The early years were hard but exciting. We built everything together. A small condo in the city, a joint business account, even a weekend routine that felt sacred. We never missed Sunday brunch. Banana pancakes, strong coffee, jazz playing softly in the background. It's funny how the simplest things become the hardest to forget. But about a year before the divorce, the energy changed. At first, it was subtle. Ethan started coming home later. He claimed the real estate market was getting competitive, that he had to hustle harder. I understood. At least, I tried to. I offered to help with the accounting. He brushed me off. He used to ask for my opinion on everything. Now, he barely looked up from his phone. Then there was the perfume, a scent I didn't wear. Light, floral, not expensive, but not mine. I found it on his shirt collar one evening when I did the laundry. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he hugged someone. Maybe it rubbed off in a crowded elevator. We've all told ourselves these little lies, haven't we? The ones that keep the peace just a little bit longer. The real turning point came one afternoon, during lunch with his mother. We were sitting at a cafe when she casually mentioned, "Ethan says he might be moving the business to Miami. Did he tell you?" I blinked. No, he hadn't. And that's when I realized I wasn't just being left out of decisions. I was being shut out of his life. That night, I waited for him to come home. I asked about Miami, calm, collected, giving him every chance to be honest. He smiled. "Oh, Mom talks too much," he said, brushing it off like lint on a blazer. Nothing's decided yet, but I saw it in his eyes. Something was decided. I just wasn't part of it. From that moment on, I stopped asking questions. Not because I trusted him, but because I didn't want him to know I had started paying attention. I began keeping a journal. Every missed call, every business trip, every time he turned his phone screen away when I walked into the room. I was building a timeline, a case, a puzzle I would one day complete. Because deep down, I already knew. Ethan wasn't just cheating on me. He was preparing to replace me. He thought I was too gentle, too forgiving, too afraid to start over. What he didn't know was that I'm not afraid of starting over. I'm afraid of not finishing what I started. Betrayal doesn't arrive like a lightning strike. It's slower. It creeps in, wearing the face of routine, the voice of excuses. and the hands of someone you thought would never lie to you. Ethan had always been charming, magnetic even. That kind of man who walks into a room and draws attention without trying. I used to think it was a gift. Later, I realized it was a weapon. At first, the changes were subtle. He started working later than usual, taking weekend trips he hadn't mentioned before. The explanations came easily to him. "The market's heating up," he'd say. "I need to be out there making connections." I believed him, or maybe I wanted to. But then, it was the small things. The phone that never left his side, even when he showered. The cold, vague responses when I asked about his day. The sudden concern for his appearance, as if he were trying to impress someone new. I remember the first time I found a clue, a receipt, folded and forgotten in the pocket of his jeans. It was from a restaurant I'd never heard of, in a town he told me he'd never been to. 2 entrees, 1 wine pairing, a dessert I knew he didn't like. I stared at it for a long time, like it was a math problem I couldn't solve. When I finally asked him about it, he laughed. "It was a client dinner," he said. "You know how this business is." But I didn't know. Not anymore. A week later, I noticed the perfume. I was folding laundry, his shirt, freshly worn, when the scent hit me. Not mine. Lighter. Floral. Something unfamiliar and unmistakably intentional. It clung to the collar like a secret, and that's when the quiet voice in the back of my mind stopped whispering and started screaming. Still, I didn't confront him. I needed more. Not for drama, for certainty. I started paying attention. I watched how his eyes darted when I mentioned his coworkers, how he flinched slightly when I touched his phone, how, one night, in his sleep, he mumbled a name. Sabrina. That was the final crack. Sabrina was someone I'd met once, a woman he introduced to me briefly at a company event as someone from marketing, pretty, polished, with a smile that felt too long. She'd barely looked at me, but I remembered how her hand lingered when she touched Ethan's arm. I had told myself it was nothing. I had convinced myself of a lot of things back then. The next day, after he left for work, I opened his desk drawer. Not something I'd ever done before, but after everything I'd seen, I didn't feel guilty. I felt entitled to the truth. It didn't take long. In the back of the drawer, hidden behind tax documents and real estate files, was a folder. No label, just thick with papers. Inside, printouts of emails, bookings, conversations, forwarded confirmations, a shared bank transfer to a name I recognized immediately, hers. There it was, in plain black and white. Weekend trips that never included me. Money transferred to an account that had no business being connected to his. And then the line that stayed with me longer than anything else. "Once everything's settled with Isadora, we'll finally be free. I hate hiding. My name, my marriage, reduced to a footnote in someone else's fantasy." I sat there, frozen. The silence in the room felt loud, and I realized I wasn't crying. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't even shaking. I was still, because in that moment, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't shocked. I was clarified. I finally saw him, not the man I had loved, or the partner I had believed in, but the man who had slowly and deliberately carved out a future that didn't include me. That night, when he came home, I made dinner. I smiled. I kissed him hello, because I wasn't ready to lose control of the narrative. Not yet. He had his plan, but so would I. And mine would be the one he never saw coming. There's a kind of silence that follows betrayal, one that wraps around your throat and tightens every time you try to breathe. I carried that silence with me for days. I would wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, my mind racing through every moment I had ever trusted Ethan, every dinner I made, every joke I laughed at, every tear I wiped from his face when business was slow or life got hard. It was like watching a movie of my own life, but in reverse, and realizing I had been miscast the whole time. I kept going through the motions, not because I didn't feel anything, but because I felt too much. The pain was too large, too raw to touch. So I stayed quiet. I smiled. I played the role. He had no idea I knew. I'd watch him drink the coffee I made each morning, completely unaware that I had already read every detail of his secret life. I would nod as he told stories about his day, all while wondering if he had kissed her before coming home. Sometimes I'd stare at him while he slept and wonder how many lies it took for someone to become so hollow. How many lines do you have to cross before you stop recognizing yourself? But the worst part, the part that made my stomach turn, was how familiar it all started to feel. This wasn't the first time I'd been overlooked. Not the first time I'd been pushed aside for someone else's ambition. My whole life I'd been taught to endure, to be the bigger person, to forgive, to understand, to smile even when it hurt. And I had done all of that, for years, with grace, with patience. But now I felt like a ghost in my own home, a placeholder in a life I helped build. I thought about the first time Ethan and I talked about having children. We were younger then, more naive. He said, "You'd be such a good mother, Isadora. You're the kind of woman who holds everything together." And I had. I'd held him together. I held our finances together. I held us together. And in return, he handed pieces of me to another woman behind my back. It wasn't just a betrayal of our vows. It was a betrayal of me, of the version of myself I had sacrificed and reshaped just to be what he needed. That kind of pain is not sharp. It's slow. It aches in waves. You cry in places you didn't expect to. In the grocery store aisle when your favorite wine is on sale. In the car, stopped at a red light, when you realize he never learned your favorite song. In the shower, because it's the only place you can sob without being heard. There was one night, about a week after I found the emails, when I came close to breaking. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the folder, the damning evidence. I had poured myself a glass of red wine, but I hadn't touched it. I just sat there, looking at everything, wondering how I had gotten here. And for a moment, I felt shame, not for what he had done, but for letting it happen. How had I not seen it? How could I have given so much of myself to someone who was already building an escape plan? But then, something inside me snapped. Not in anger, not even in sadness. It was a click, like a switch being flipped. A calm clarity I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about whether I had failed as a wife. It was about the fact that I had been loyal, and he had used that loyalty as a weapon. And that, I decided, would be the last time I let anyone mistake my kindness for weakness. I wiped my eyes. I folded the folder shut. I stood up, took a deep breath, and looked around the house. The furniture? I had picked it. The decor? Mine. The bills? Paid by me. This wasn't just our life. This was my empire. He could think he had the upper hand, for now. But he had underestimated me, just like everyone else. And that was going to be his biggest mistake. Once I stopped grieving, I started calculating. I've always been methodical, even in chaos. Numbers, patterns, timelines. That's how my brain works. It's how I survived in a male-dominated industry for over 20 years. I made a career out of making sense of other people's messes. And now, I would do the same with my own. I didn't want to destroy Ethan. That would be too easy, too loud. I wanted something else. I wanted him to think he was winning, all the way until the moment he realized he had absolutely nothing left. So, I began quietly. The first step was to isolate every asset he had touched and trace where he moved them. He had made one mistake, and it was a critical one. He used our shared financial advisor to hide his transfers. I still had access to the online portal, even though he probably assumed I never checked it. Wrong. Every transaction he made told a story. I followed the breadcrumbs, from our joint accounts to a shell LLC in Florida, and from there to a personal savings account under his name only. But the real surprise? Sabrina's name was listed as a secondary signer. He wasn't just hiding money from me. He was handing it to her. I printed everything, sorted it into a new folder, not the one with the emails. This one was purely financial. Numbers, account names, wire transfers, real estate documents, evidence. Undeniable, chronological evidence. Then, I stopped touching the money. I wanted it all to stay exactly where it was. Let him keep building his empire of lies. Let him think I was too broken to notice. Meanwhile, I began moving pieces. I met with a lawyer, quietly. Not the kind Ethan would expect. Not flashy, not expensive, but brilliant. A woman, older, sharp. The kind of mind that knows how to win battles without stepping onto the battlefield. We spent weeks putting together a strategy. I told her everything: the affair, the accounts, the emails, the shell company. She didn't blink. When I finished, she closed the file and said, "You've already done half the work. Now let's make sure he never sees it coming." I also started recording things. Subtle things. His late-night calls. His comments about finally being free. The way he spoke about Sabrina when he thought I wasn't listening. Not for court. For leverage. I didn't want a messy divorce. I wanted an efficient one. One where I walked away with everything I built. And he walked away wondering how he lost control. I changed the passwords to my personal accounts. I made new email addresses. I opened a separate bank account and slowly began moving my consulting income into it. All of this happened in silence. No accusations, no confrontations. Because I knew the exact moment he'd strike, he started getting bolder, staying out later, sending texts in front of me without even trying to hide them. One night, he came home reeking of perfume, hers again, and didn't even bother to lie. "I'm tired," he said, tossing his keys on the counter. "I'm going to bed." And I just nodded. Let him think I was beaten. Let him think I was still clinging to a marriage he had long since abandoned. Let him build his little world on sand. In public, I was the perfect wife, smiling, gracious, attending events on his arm, pretending not to notice how many people knew, or suspected, and pitied me. Let them, because pity would soon turn to shock. And Ethan? Ethan was a man who liked to be admired. He fed on approval. He needed to win. That would be my greatest advantage. When someone believes they're too clever to lose, they never notice when the rules have changed. So I waited. I watched. I took notes. He had built a life on deception, and I was going to let him live in that lie just a little bit longer, right up until the day the foundation crumbled beneath him. Not with a fight, not with a scream, but with a simple sentence, said at exactly the right time. And when that day came, he wouldn't just lose me. He'd lose everything he thought was his. The hardest part of revenge isn't the planning. It's the pretending. Pretending to be calm when your blood is boiling. Pretending to love someone you barely recognize. Pretending to sleep beside a man who has no idea you're the one writing his ending. Every morning, I got up and made coffee. Every night, I kissed him goodnight. And in between, I became a master of silence. Ethan thought he had won. He strutted through our house like a man with nothing to fear. Confident. Careless. Smirking when he thought I wasn't looking. He started leaving his phone unlocked. That, more than anything, told me he no longer saw me as a threat. And that was exactly what I needed him to believe. In public, I played the supportive wife. I hosted our friends for dinner, laughed at his stories, nodded in all the right places. I watched him soak in the praise like a thirsty man at a fountain. "Isadora's so lucky," someone once said at a charity gala. "He's such a catch." I smiled. My lips smiled, not my eyes. The truth is, Ethan wasn't a catch. He was a performance. A salesman in a custom suit, selling versions of himself to whoever would listen. And I was no longer buying. Meanwhile, Sabrina became bolder. I saw her name pop up on his phone during dinner. Once, she even sent a voice message. And he played it with me sitting right there. She laughed in it. Soft, breathy. "Miss you already." He grinned, glanced at me briefly, and turned the volume down. I didn't say a word. What would be the point? He wanted a reaction. And I had something better. Control. He thought I was too weak to leave, too dependent, too broken to fight back. What he didn't know was that I'd already found a new apartment. A penthouse across town, leased in my name only. My new bank account had grown enough to support me for years. My business had been quietly separated from his, legally and financially. I had erased him from my future. Now I was just waiting for the perfect moment to let him know. The real brilliance of my plan wasn't in the evidence. It wasn't even in the strategy. It was in the timing. I was going to give him what he wanted, the divorce. But I was going to let him ask for it. He would think it was his idea, that he'd finally broken me down enough to walk away with everything. And when he did, that's when I'd open the drawer with the folders, the emails, the financial transfers, the shell company documents, the screenshots, the voice recordings, all meticulously labeled, neatly organized. Enough to dismantle his reputation, enough to raise legal questions that could cost him everything, enough to ensure that he wouldn't just lose me, he'd lose Sabrina too, the moment she realized he had no more power left to offer. But until then, I kept playing my part. He still kissed me on the cheek when he left for work. He still said, "Love you," over his shoulder, like a man clocking out of a job. He still brought me flowers once a week, guilt wrapped in cellophane. And every time he did, I placed them in the same silver vase, right next to the folder, the one I knew I'd hand to my lawyer the day he served me with divorce papers. I remember one morning, a Tuesday, he came down the stairs, already dressed for a meeting. He looked smug, pleased, like someone who thought the game was already over. He kissed my forehead and said, "Thanks for sticking through all this. I know I've been distant. Things will be clearer soon." I smiled, and I said the only thing I could without laughing, "I'm sure they will." Then I watched him leave, briefcase in hand, walking directly into the world I had already begun to take away from him. And the best part? He still thought he was in control. But tell me, if you were me, would you have waited this long? Or would you have already ended it? I thought I had already felt the worst of it. The lies, the betrayal, the indifference. I had absorbed it all like a sponge, quietly collecting every drop until I could wring it out on my terms. But there's always that one moment you don't see coming, the one that changes everything, not because it's more painful than the rest, but because it's so deeply cruel. It was a Friday afternoon when it happened. I was in the kitchen, answering client emails, sipping my second coffee of the day. Ethan came home early, which was unusual. He looked restless. He didn't greet me, didn't even kiss my cheek, just dropped his bag by the door, loosened his tie, and started pacing like a man rehearsing a confession. I stayed quiet, watching. Finally, he sat down across from me. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Listen," he began. "I've been thinking. We've been growing apart, and I think maybe it's time we talked about separating." I didn't react. I didn't even blink. He took my silence as agreement and kept going. "I want to do this respectfully," he said, as if those words still meant something. "No lawyers, no drama. We'll divide things fairly. I can help you get set up somewhere else. I'll keep the house, of course. It's closer to my office." He looked at me like he was offering a favor, like I should be grateful. But it wasn't the audacity of his proposal that broke something in me. It was what he said next. "I've already spoken to Sophie about it. She's okay with it, as long as we don't make it messy." Sophie, our daughter. He had gone to her first. Told her we were separating. Told her his version. He had planted the story before I even had a chance to tell her the truth. That's when the rage hit me. Cold, clean, and precise. He had crossed every line, not just as a husband, not just as a man, but as a father. He used our daughter as a prop in his carefully staged performance, turned her into another piece of leverage, another way to corner me into silence. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that I had already planned for this. I had a second folder, not the one with the finances, not the one with the emails. This one had names, timelines, a private investigator's report, photos of him and Sabrina, holding hands outside her condo, entering hotels together, smiling in ways he hadn't smiled at me in years. And most importantly, timestamps, dates that overlapped with his time at home, with family trips, with moments he had claimed to be working late or burned out. I hadn't wanted to use it. Part of me still held on to the idea of preserving some form of dignity for Sophie's sake. But now, that part of me was gone. He wasn't just trying to take my home. He was trying to rewrite the narrative, erase my side of the story before I had a chance to speak it. So I said nothing. I stood up, walked over to the counter, and poured myself another cup of coffee. "All right," I said finally, "if that's what you want." He blinked, surprised at how easy it was. "Really? You're okay with this?" I turned, met his eyes, and smiled. I think it's time, because he had just triggered the last condition of my plan, his own arrogance. He thought he had broken me down far enough to leave me behind. But in reality, he had just handed me the opportunity to execute everything I'd prepared. Later that night, after he fell asleep, so peacefully, like a man who thought he'd gotten away with everything, I pulled out all 3 folders, the emails, the financials, the photos. I laid them on the dining table like weapons. The next morning I would call my lawyer, the real one. Not only would I respond to his request for separation, I would deliver my terms, backed by evidence, by facts, by months of silent strategy. He would walk into what he thought was the beginning of his new life and find himself standing at the edge of everything he was about to lose. It's strange how calm I felt the day everything came undone. I woke up early, earlier than usual. The house was quiet, still cloaked in that soft morning haze where nothing feels real yet. Ethan was still asleep, one arm sprawled across the sheets like he owned the place. Like he always had. I looked at him for a long time, not with sadness, not even with anger, just clarity. This was the man I once loved, the man I built a life with, but not the man I would allow to define my ending. I got dressed, made coffee, and set the folders on the dining table, perfectly aligned. One for finances, one for the affair, one for the timeline. I didn't need to write a note. The documents would speak louder than anything I could say. Then I left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I went straight to my lawyer's office, where we had prepared everything. That morning, he received 2 things: a formal divorce petition on my terms, and a cease and desist letter regarding any further use of our joint business accounts. By the time he called me, 3 missed calls in a row, I was already sitting across town in my new apartment. Sunlight poured in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was warm, clean, mine. When he finally got through, his voice cracked with disbelief. "Isadora, what the hell is this?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match his panic. "I'm giving you exactly what you asked for," I said. "Separation. Except now, it's with full transparency." He stammered, tried to deny things. "You went through my things? This is a violation." "No," I cut in gently. "This is protection. You made your choices. I simply documented them." There was a long pause. Then, "We can work this out. We don't need to involve lawyers." I actually laughed, quietly, the way you laugh when something no longer has the power to hurt you. "I already did work it out," I said. "I just never told you." He started talking again, fast and messy. Excuses, blame, accusations. But I hung up, peacefully. That was the last time I ever heard his voice. The aftermath, as expected, was loud. On his side, Sabrina disappeared 2 weeks after the documents landed. I imagine she realized the man she was left with wasn't the prize she thought he was. The house? Sold. The proceeds divided as the court ordered. The accounts? Frozen, then redistributed. His reputation? Not shattered, just adjusted. The right people learned enough to stop trusting him with their money. And me? I didn't take everything. I didn't need to. I took what mattered. My independence. My dignity. My name. I rebuilt my consulting business, fully mine, no shadows. I traveled, alone at first, then with Sophie when she was ready. It wasn't easy, explaining everything to her, but she saw the truth with her own eyes. Children know when something's broken, even when we try to protect them from the noise. One night, months later, she asked me, "Mom, why didn't you just yell at him? Or do something big?" I smiled. Because the loudest thing I could do was walk away in silence, knowing he never saw it coming. There's something liberating about being underestimated. It gives you space to move, to plan, to win, before they even realize they're losing. I used to think closure came with apologies, with understanding, with mutual regret, but now I know. Closure comes when you stop waiting for someone to see your worth and start living like you never needed their validation in the first place. And that's exactly what I've done. People always ask me now, do you regret it? Do I regret staying so long? Do I regret trusting him? Do I regret not leaving sooner? And the truth is, no, I don't. Because every version of me, the naive one, the hopeful one, the broken one, they all played a part in becoming this version. The one who left with her head held high, the one who didn't burn bridges. She dismantled them, brick by brick, until there was nothing left to cross. The one who didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't collapse. She simply ended it. I look back now and see that my silence was never weakness. It was a strategy. It was the space I needed to hear myself again. For so many years, my identity had been tethered to someone else's dreams. Ethan's ambition, Ethan's business, Ethan's idea of what a wife should be. And I shaped myself around that. I bent. I adapted. I became less, so he could feel like more. But the beautiful thing about being broken is that, if you survive it, you get to choose how you put yourself back together. And this time, I chose differently. No more shrinking. No more second-guessing. No more carrying the emotional weight of someone else's bad decisions. I now live in a home that feels like me. Books on every shelf. Sunlight pouring through the windows. Music playing softly in the background. Not to please anyone, just because I like it that way. I still make coffee every morning. But now, I drink it slowly, without waiting for anyone else to join me. I don't check his social media. I don't wonder what he's doing. I don't care what story he tells about me. Let him say I changed. Let him say I gave up. Because I did change. I did give up. I gave up on begging to be seen. I gave up on waiting for loyalty from someone who only understood possession. I gave up on being the woman who keeps everything together while falling apart quietly inside. And in that surrender, I found freedom. Sophie sees it. She sees me laughing more now. She sees me cooking again, not out of duty, but joy. She sees the way I carry myself, not heavier, not bitter, but lighter, certain. Sometimes we talk about what happened. Sometimes we don't. But the unspoken truth between us is this. I didn't just teach her how to survive a heartbreak. I showed her how to never settle for less than self-worth. One day she asked me, "Would you ever trust someone again?" I thought about it. Then I said, "I don't need to trust someone to feel whole. I just need to trust myself not to forget who I am again." That's the gift Ethan unknowingly gave me. Not through love, through loss. He stripped everything away, and what was left was the truth. I am not delicate. I am deliberate. So no, I don't regret it. Because in the end, he took everything he could carry, but he left behind the most dangerous thing of all, a woman who knows exactly what she's worth. I know I'm not the only woman who's ever trusted too much, who's ever stayed too long, who's ever smiled through tears just to keep the peace. If you're still in that place, questioning, doubting, holding everything together while losing yourself in the process, let me say something I wish someone had said to me. You are not crazy. You are not weak. And you are not alone. Sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do is reclaim her silence and turn it into strength. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to make a scene. I just needed to know who I was again. And once I remembered, he never stood a chance. So if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own strength, your own worth, your own quiet power, I hope you'll share it. Not just for me, for you. For every woman who ever walked away with less than she deserved and built something greater on her own. Have you ever had to let go of someone just to find yourself again? Tell me in the comments. Your story might be the voice another woman needs to hear. If this story resonated with you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs it, and don't forget to subscribe. Because I have many more stories to tell, and you won't want to miss them.